but she's 94 years old. I'm just going to say it.
Woo! Say it. I feel like that is, yes, I think that is worthy of a round of applause in and of itself. She's also the grandmother of 11 grandchildren, so she's right back here.
Woo!
Please bring her up,
Martha Toll.
Martha Toll!
Yeah, sit down. Take a load off.
Well, when I first got a message on my computer that I was invited to speak at the Hemlock Tavern, I thought it sounded like such an interesting place. I said yes. And when I told a friend of mine, he said, well, be careful, don't have the house drink. So anyway, I'm delighted to be here tonight at the Verity Club, and I'm so delighted that all of you are here too. When I first thought I would write a book, I said to my husband, I don't know if I can think of 20,000 connected words, and I had just sold a few short stories before then, and he said, oh, I'm just sure you can. And so I started in one summer. I asked my oldest son to babysit the other children. Incidentally, we always referred to our family as we had 5 sons and each one has a sister. And in case you're thinking 10 or 12, thanks, but no, it was only 6. We had 1 girl. So naturally, the title for my first book was Too Many Boys. So my oldest son, Steve, would babysit the others for 1 hour each day during the summer while I ran upstairs and I wrote as fast as I could. I was writing by hand then. And then in the afternoon, I would ask my children and all their friends in the neighborhood to come in and listen to what I had written. It was a great setup for learning how to write for kids. And if they said things like, oh, that's good, Mom, go upstairs and write some more, I thought I was on the right track. But one day, when I was reading a chapter, one of the boys in the neighborhood just stood up and walked out. That's when I began to think about this thing called revising. And I took a really hard look at that chapter. But then I decided I'd finish the book. And when I did, I asked some twin girls on the street if they would read it. So they did, and they said they liked it, but they said it was really hard to get into it. So I thought that sounded terrible, especially when writing for young readers. You don't want to have a slow beginning. So I started in and slashed the first chapter, I took it off. And then the second chapter had to cut it off too. This is hard, you know. These are all these good words you think you've worked so hard on. The third chapter, it went too. And then, finally, there was the start of the book, the conflict between Katie and the pesky boy next door. So that book got finished, and my husband, and it sold, and so my husband was so pleased with me, he kept telling all his friends, he'd say, just call me Mr. Martha Tolls. Then I started to get fan letters, which was great. And one day I got a particularly unusual one, and the girl said, oh, I love your book. Oh, it's such a good book. It's just a wonderful book. It's the best book I've ever read. And then I turned the page over and read on the back, and she said, and it's the only book I've ever read. So anyway, my daughter took a slightly different view of all this. And I was sitting at the dinner table one night being rather exuberant about my book sale. And so after a little bit, she looked at me. She was then about age 11. And she looked up at me and she said, "You know, Mom, you're not really an author. You're just a mother who wrote a book." So I thought, well, I better go on and show her I can do some more. So I wrote another one called Katie for President. And I happened to see the original manuscript the other day. I was getting ready to ship off my papers. Luckily, Smith College has a research center for women's writing. So anyway, I came across this manuscript, and there was my original ending. Oh, I liked it so much. And it made me just sad all over again that my writing group had persuaded me to change it. The group have sold several hundred books, so they obviously know something. But they persuaded me to I had to make the ending, it was too tied up, too much happiness. And so I had to change it and make it so that Katie did not win the election. And I just am sorry yet that I had to make that change. But that's what happens when you revise. I started a third Katie book, and I sent the first draft to my editor at Scholastic, and then things didn't seem to be going quite right. So I thought I had a chance to go into New York and see her. But before I went to see her, I had never gone to see an editor before. So I went to Elizabeth Arden, and I had a lot of makeup put on my face, and my hair all done up. Then I went over to Scholastic, and out came this gal in sort of slacks and baggy shirt and frizzy hair. I realized I didn't need to do all that. Anyway, we sat down and talked for a little bit. Her office was kind of an open air situation. And then she said, "I think we better go into a private room." So we went in there and closed the door. I was so impressed, she apparently didn't want to discuss my plot where others could hear. I thought that was a great idea. But then she gave me the bad news, and she said, "This is not publishable the way it is." So that was not so good. And I thought I had such a great plot. It came from something that happened when I was a newspaper reporter some years before. When I was a reporter, all the young men were off in the war, so there was no crime. And finally, we really were sort of wishing for something to happen. And finally, one day, a woman called and said some little children had stolen her beautiful jewelry. And so we all thought on the paper, we thought, at least we got a big crime to write up. But then a day or so later, she called and said she had found some little children in the neighborhood playing with the jewelry. So that was the end of the crime story. But I was using that as the basis for this third Katie book I was writing, which was to be a mystery. And I had not written mysteries before. So anyway, the editor and I discussed it for quite a while, and then I left her and thought and decided more or less to start over and work on it some more, and this time to be more aware of things like suspects and clues. That's such an important part of a mystery. And of course, I also tried to stick to the basic rules for fiction, which is to have a story question for each chapter, and then to have, of course, a good goal for the end of the book, and to have plenty of obstacles so your character has to overcome them, and then the character has to learn something in the end. So I thought I finally mastered all that and put it together. And sure enough, I did sell it to Scholastic, so that was okay. So from then on, I knew that rewriting and revising would be part of whatever I did. And as they told you, I sold then some more books to Scholastic, and a couple dozen short stories, including some that were on the LA Times Kids page. And recently I've sold a few essays. The titles of those are, a couple of them. One is called What's Under the Couch? And another one is called This Is What It's Like to Be 90. If you want to read some of these, you can go online and read on Dame magazine or Skirt magazine. But one thing I thought was interesting about all this experience was what my husband thought of it. I overheard him talking one day to some friends. So I leaned closer so I could hear, and I heard him say, you know, through Martha, I've met a lot of authors, and they all have one thing in common. And so I thought, oh, he's going to say we're all so creative, or so intelligent, or so smart. Instead, he said, you know, they're all so persistent.
Martha. Thank you. And her books are out there as well, I can read. So get some of those. I like the bright side of war. All the there's no crime. That's good. I never heard that before. That's good.
Hey, has anybody here ever participated in National Novel Writing Month? Does anybody do that? Because isn't one of the things, no plot, no problem?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, Grant Foster,
Executive director,
yeah,
right there.
he's right here.
So people can see you.
Yeah, there he is.
If anyone
Executive
wants to
director
hear
of
more
National
about
Novel
it,
Writing Month.
come talk to Grant. It starts in November. So